Homo sapiens evolved, earlier hominins like Homo habilis were using stone tools. The Neanderthals had primitive technology like clothing, weapons, and the iPod Nano. The two really big technologies, language and fire, were around before us and indeed shaped our evolution. In a very real sense, we've always been technologically augmented. So transhumanists just ask, how far can we push it? Transhumanists want to apply technology to overcome limits imposed by our biological and genetic heritage. Transhumanists regard human nature not as an end in itself, not as perfect, and not as having any claim on our allegiance. Rather, it is just one point along an evolutionary pathway, and we can learn to reshape our own nature in ways we deem desirable and valuable. By thoughtfully, carefully, and yet boldly applying technology to ourselves, we can become something no longer accurately described as human. We can become post-human. Here's a little example, so you can get a taste. The philosopher David de Grazia imagines a woman called Marina, who has anxieties and insecurities and is unhappy in herself. Marina wants to take the antidepressant Prozac because she's heard it can make people more confident, even if they don't have a mental illness. So she wants to use a drug, which is a kind of edible technology, to transform herself and go beyond her limitations. De Grazia asks, what do we think here? Is it okay? Is she still the same person afterwards? And what he's really getting at is, what is your authentic self? Marina decides that her insecurities are not a core part of who she is. They're actually getting in the way of who she is. We might say she does not identify with those feelings, so she uses technology to get rid of them. De Grazia says that means the self, the human subject, is not fixed and given to us, but that actually self-creation is part of what we do. Wow. What an amazing, hypothetical science fiction scenario. The point is, transhumanist philosophers think not just about the technology of tomorrow, but also what technology could tell us about ourselves today. Modern transhumanism got going in the 1990s, when the economy existed and it wasn't uncomfortable to talk about how you like Harry Potter. And reflecting that era, a lot of transhumanist writing is quite optimistic. It's refreshing, almost quaint to hear people talking about how the future is going to be better. The actual word transhumanism was popularized in the 50s by British biologist Julian Huxley, who saw that so many people are forced to live worse lives than they need to and never reach their full potential. Huxley thought that with the right application of science and reason, we could solve problems like poverty or preventable illness. It is as if man had been suddenly appointed managing director of the biggest business of all, the business of evolution. Appointed without being asked if he wanted it and without proper warning and preparation. What is more, he can't refuse the job, whether he wants to or not, whether he's conscious of what he's doing or not. He is, in point of fact, determining the future direction of evolution on this earth. That is his inescapable destiny. And the sooner he realizes it and starts believing in it, the better for all concerned. Huxley's work is grounded in this real desire to make the world a better place. But at the same time, he was also a eugenicist. Even after World War II, there were a lot of people like him who condemned Nazi eugenics, but thought it could have worked if they'd done it right. There is an inspiring optimism to his essay, but in my opinion, there's also something slightly sinister about comparing evolution to a business, something you can be fired from if you don't contribute. Julian Huxley was the brother of Aldous Huxley, the author of Brave New World, so Christmas dinner must have been a little tense around their house. Reflecting this tension, a common question that transhumanists and their critics grapple with is, who decides what counts as enhancement and limitation? The usual answer is that it's just personal choice. If Marina decides that her anxieties are limiting her, well then she can enhance herself. But we know, don't we, that when it comes to tech, things can sometimes technically be a choice, but in reality compulsory. For example, you don't have to have an internet connection, but good luck applying for a job if you don't. Maybe worth bearing that sort of thing in mind when we're thinking about cognitive enhancements or genetic engineering. Maybe that's where those angry Canadians are coming from. A lot of people are made uneasy by the idea of transhumanism, and maybe some of that unease comes from the suspicion that tech can be more than it seems. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the technology that changes human beings. We sometimes think that technology is essentially neutral. It can have good or bad effects, and it might be really important who controls it, but a tool, many people like to think, is just a tool. Guns don't kill people, people do. But some philosophers have argued that technology can have values built into it that we may not realize. The classic example is overpasses in New York that were designed in the 1920s by architect Robert Moses. Allegedly, Moses deliberately built the overpasses too low for buses to get under. And since buses were more likely to carry low-income people of color, that meant they couldn't get to the places that white residents wanted to keep segregated. Now, that story might not actually be historically accurate, but it contains the germ of an interesting idea. The philosopher Don Idy says tech can open or close possibilities. It's not just about its function or who controls it. He says technology can provide a framework for action. Assuming for the sake of argument that the Robert Moses story was true, the overpass helps shape society according to the values of its designer. We could take this idea one step further, actually, and say that technology also provides a framework for different kinds of subjects, people, to exist. Consider something like modern contraception, which allows people reliable control over when they become pregnant. The tech allows you to make a choice. And suddenly the old way of doing things, where women in particular were just expected to be baby factories, becomes one option rather than the way things have to be. In a manner of speaking, we might say that the modern feminist subject who makes choices about her own body is enabled by technology. That's quite a lofty thing to grasp, so here's some more examples. Some writers have talked about how the design of social media can make you behave like an asshole, even if you don't mean to. The philosopher Heather Widdows talks about how beauty technology and cosmetic surgery creates pressure to be a different kind of woman now than was possible 50 years ago. And God knows that as the technology of medical transition has developed, it's opened up very different ways of being a transgender subject. Testosterone blockers, for example, are a kind of technology that just wasn't available to trans people 100 years ago, but which make me, at least, happier, kinder, more intelligent. We might say enhanced compared to what I was before. Unless I miss a dose, and then I wake up feeling like venom.
Abby, we must eat everything in the fridge.
Shut up, testosterone! Alright, so we've got this theory that tech can open or close possibilities, provide a framework for action and being, but how exactly could it do that? We can go into depth here by looking at the work of philosopher Martin Heidegger. Now, some of you are going, Heidegger? Wasn't Heidegger a... Yes, he was. Don't spoil it for those who don't know. We will come back to that. For now, I'm going to encrypt that secret data about Martin Heidegger and encode it in this envelope. We'll come back to that later. Heidegger's work on technology fits in with a tradition in philosophy called phenomenology, which is all about focusing on what you experience. And I think the best way of explaining it is to do a little demonstration. It's one that we've used on the show before, and it'll help you grasp what we're talking about.